Okay, boomer.
This is Chair Simulator, a jokey, memey, but also quite literal simulator game. As you can see by the title, that's the basis of this video. Because despite action, adventure, shooter games all seeming fun and engaging, there's something that intrigues me about simulation games. Usually people turn to fantasy games for escapism, wanting to take themselves out of the real world and into something more epic and exciting. But there's also the flip side of that. Those who play games that ground them rigorously to reality, doing real life jobs and work that's typically classed as tedious or exhausting. Cleaning, driving, fishing, all things which take time and don't appear fun on the surface. But before we look into specific examples, let's try and actually define exactly what a simulator game is, because it's actually a lot more complicated than you'd think. Firstly, because pretty much any game could be classed as a simulation. The Sims is a life simulator, FIFA is a sports simulator, and Call of Duty is technically a war simulator, despite how unrealistic the gameplay is. The only thing is, if you were to call these kinds of games simulators instead of sports games and shooters, you would be right, but not accurate. There's then another layer of simulation games that gets us a bit closer to what I believe are true simulator games, which are games like Theme Hospital, The Binding of Isaac, and Enter the Gungeon. The last two are known as roguelike games, or dungeon crawlers, which in a way you can call dungeon simulators. What I distinguish between games like this and a similar example like Zelda is that these games introduce the endless element. In Zelda, you're constantly working your way towards the final goal of rescuing the princess and completing the Triforce. In Isaac, a game heavily inspired by Zelda, they take that and make the gameplay loop last infinitely. There's an incredible amount of stuff to unlock, including areas, power-ups, and bosses. So many that you might never unlock everything. You can beat a run by killing the final boss, but eventually that doesn't really mean anything anymore. The reason the game stays fun is because the gameplay loop's so solid. Having everything randomized over each run keeps the game surprising. So if you play the game long enough and unlock everything, you'll still want to keep playing and see how big your win streak can get. Enter the Gungeon is a very similar example, although comparing anything to Isaac is a bit unfair, considering it's about as perfect as you can get with a roguelite. Theme Hospital introduces the strategy element, which I'd argue is almost synonymous with the term simulation. A key aspect of simulation games are typically realism, which is completely exempt from this game. But in games like Age of Empires 2, you're actively being told about the historical importance of what you're about to do, and then simulating those actions in the game. So we now know the term simulation is a lot broader than we'd initially think. But let's talk about what most people and I consider to be the most recognizable types of simulator games. We'll start with one of the most popular ones right now, Power Wash Simulator. To anyone who doesn't play games, this would sound like a joke, but it does actually have quite a satisfying gameplay loop depending on your tastes. All you need to do in this game is agree to certain jobs and clean up the mess with your power washer. That's basically it. You can upgrade your gear with the money you get, buy soaps, but really, that's it. This is where the distinction comes for me. I think most people could play games like Isaac and Theme Hospital and have fun, but I reckon a lot of people would be incredibly bored if you told them to play this game. It's a game specifically made for people who like that slow burn of cleaning something up, which does sound inherently boring, but once again is quite engaging depending on who you are. A similar example was Lawnmower Simulator, where you once again take on jobs, mow lawns, and get upgrades with the money you get. I think the mundanity is a key aspect of these games, focusing on jobs that involve tedious and long processes. If you just rush through a lawn, destroying all the flowers and wrecking the ground, you're not really playing the game right. That's not really where the fun is aimed to be garnered. It comes from the satisfaction of seeing the progress bar slowly go up, chipping away at the huge amount of grass, and creating certain patterns. If your simulation games are too fun, bombastic, or unrealistic, you've kind of gotten away from the simulation aspect and turned it into something else. I think a misconception of these games are that they're difficult, which I almost entirely disagree with. We can see that with our next example, PC Building Simulator, as well as our previous examples. This game shows you working in a computer repair shop, where you can accept or decline certain orders from your computer. These start off fairly simple, with orders like removing viruses, cleaning maintaining PCs and replacing broken parts. But as the game progresses, things start to get gradually harder, tapping into computer apps like 3D Mark and Can I Run This to make tasks more layered and obscure. The distinction here is this difficulty comes from the intricacies, not the actual gameplay. I'd go as far to say the gameplay is actually really simple and quite bad, and only appeals to those who either love the repetition or love the detailed exploration of PC parts. All the well-known brands like Intel and AMD show up here, so they've got those elements covered. But how you actually interact with the PCs and their parts is just plain bland. It tells you very clearly what parts work and what parts don't, where all these parts need to be fitted, and even putting in these parts just requires you to click and hold most of the time. So it's a two-edged sword in my eyes, because I'm personally satisfied with the gameplay, despite the drawbacks I've already mentioned. Adding that extra layer of complexity would perhaps make the experience too overwhelming, but on the flip side of that, I can imagine there's other people who want more of an authentic experience, leaving players more up to their own intuition, and letting them make mistakes like incorrectly placing a CPU, plugging wrong cables into wrong parts, and all that kind of stuff. I've wasted a lot of time playing this game specifically, and I'd say it's quite a lot of fun, even if you're not interested in computers. It's once again that focus on unlocking new things, and having the game become increasingly complex. Up next are what I consider two hidden gems amongst a cavalcade of shitty simulators: Drug Dealer Simulator and Russian Fishing 4. The problem with sim games is that at this point the genre's very oversaturated, and more than any other genre at the moment, includes some fucking terrible games. You could see that from Chair Simulator, but I mean, that was inherently supposed to be bad. But games like Junkyard Simulator has to go down as one of the most horrible experiences I've spent playing a game in a while. If you're a fan of these games like myself, it's a strange but noticeable characteristic of the genre. The fact there's a lot of crappy simulators, and even the ones that are good, typically don't ever seem like there's been a huge team or budget behind them. Power Wash and Lawn Mowing Sim come to mind. They both look good enough, and function perfectly well, but looking at the games up close reveals how outdated some of the parts are, like how the people in Lawnmower Sim look straight out a PS2 game, or on the flip side, how Power Wash Simulator feels like you're in a ghost town. These don't destroy the games, obviously, but just makes them feel lesser compared to a lot of other games. Anyways, Drug Dealer Simulator would initially appear to be a piss take, but has quite a fun gameplay loop. I should state that I only played the free sample version of the game, with me not even realizing there was a full version, although I imagine they only expanded more on the initial concept of the demo. If you can believe it, this game revolves around drug deals, with you having to order and sell product. The thing I like about this game is how it doesn't leave you up to your own devices, and isn't too complex. Too many simulator games leave you in the dark, expecting you to do these complex tasks with only huge pages of tutorials being your guide, and that's a problem in even some of the best ones. Right, let me just say, the game's got the best opening ever, with some of the most strangely delivered dialogue I've ever heard.
Yeah, and fuck you too! The adventure is hot. Yesterday you got so fucked up that even I forgot where the keys are.
Who are you talking to? The game world is weird, janky, and fucking scary at some points. And despite not seeming anywhere near AAA quality, the sound design and general atmosphere of the city does make it feel genuinely alive. NPCs look and walk weird. The lighting is incredibly flat, but interacting with people, buying and packing drugs, and then dropping them off to people who message you online does feel quite immersive. You start off selling weed and speed, which you need to buy from your computer. This is where you can also adjust how much you're selling for, as well as accepting orders. New drugs get unlocked as you level up, which is done by completing orders and missions, such as spray painting certain parts of the city. Police do eventually get introduced, leading to some weirdly intense chase sections. I'm not exactly sure how they work, but I assume if you get too close they'll ask to search you, where you can either run away or potentially get caught carrying drugs. I didn't spend a huge amount of time with this game, but the time I did spend was fun, and I can see this game has a lot of potential to stay engaging, with increasing levels, different drugs, and new areas to unlock and take over. Russian Fishing 4 is a bit more laid back, and as you can assume is mainly focused on fishing. There's a lot of these kinds of fishing games floating around, but I was genuinely impressed at the amount of depth here, as well as some nice touches along the way. I actually really enjoy fishing in real life, but I do it so rarely that I barely know anything, but I can assume the level of detail here isn't too bad. You can customize elements like your rod, your hook, your line, and of course your bait. There's a very large amount of customization here, which I'm sure will impress people who are into this stuff. The actual fishing is also really satisfying and surprisingly realistic. You first decide how long your line is, with that line also having some very satisfying physics. You need to cast it out and wait, where you'll eventually see your float start bobbing up and down. The ripples that occur in the water, and just the subtlety of how the float reacts, I found to be very lifelike and nuanced. And luckily, once you've got the fish hooked, all you need to do is hold the mouse button until you get it back. There's a chance you'll lose the fish in the process, but that never happened to me personally. From the gameplay alone, you can see exactly who this is aimed at. People who want to relax, and people who like fishing. It's a very mellow process, which made me confused when I realized there were kind of realistic survival elements, with you having energy and hunger bars. Luckily, they aren't too invasive, as eating a couple chocolate bars filled my hunger up all the way, with it barely dropping the rest of the time I played. It's just an all-round nice experience with a lot of depth. You can wander around the environment and take in the views. You can head to the grocery store to buy food, or the fish shop to sell any fish you caught. I also really like the addition of the online chat on the left-hand side, giving you updates on everyone else's catches. This might annoy some people, but gave the game more a sense of community for me personally, as opposed to just fishing by yourself. Overall, a good, relaxing game. Once again, with a very layered and detailed list of equipment, and a variety of areas to explore and fish to catch. So everything we've looked at so far is pretty good. Some are slightly underdeveloped, but overall, pretty fun. So let's take a look at an example of a terrible simulator game, Junkyard Simulator. It starts off promising, with the same guitar music that seems to be in every single one of these games. But falls down immediately when starting the game. This hands down has to be one of the ugliest games I've ever played. Everything looks so grainy, dirty and horrible, and not in any kind of good way. The game also runs horribly, and there's so much shit on the screen you can barely tell what you're looking at. It's like having the game be incredibly blurry wasn't bad enough. They had to cram as many things into the HUD as possible, and for some reason make the mini-map take up the entire bottom right section. You can pick up only certain objects, which might cause them to do this. But in this section, we've got to collect some parts and put them in the back of a truck. If the invisible walls and confusing layout doesn't stop you, I'm pretty sure the car will. The driving mechanics are some of the worst I've ever experienced in a game. Basically, if you want to turn, the game says fuck off and makes you slide around everywhere. This is already bad enough, but I wanted to give the game a chance. But it actually stopped me, as due to the extremely bad HUD, I had no idea where I was going, causing me to head to an area that was apparently only available in the future, despite literally being right in front of me, which caused my car to veer into a railroad track with an invisible wall, making it impossible for me to get up again. They even implemented a reset button in case this happened, but the game's so badly made that resetting did this. Luckily, this was free, but you should watch out when buying these simulator games, as there's plenty that will charge you for this kind of experience. We then have two games which I find kind of similar, with one being fairly enjoyable, and the other being really fucking annoying. I only played Viscera Cleanup Detail for a short amount of time. I really like the concept of this game, with you essentially always being put into this role of a cleaner, who has to tidy up blood, body parts, and just the general mess after some kind of battle. You aren't the space warrior or god of war. You're the guy that has to deal with the chaos they leave behind. The actual gameplay though didn't really grab me, and that's okay. It's once again another example of a game that isn't very deep in terms of mechanics, at least from what I played. You mop up blood, put body parts in containers, and have to use a bucket of water when your mop becomes too bloody. That's about it. I'd say the main problem with this game might be the scale. There's so much stuff to clean up here, with some of these areas being downright massive. Add on the fact you have to pick up things one by one with your hand, and also that knocking over these containers or buckets, which is very easy to do, will leave you with another entire mess to clean up. So yeah, overall gameplay's not for me, but I see the appeal. It's mainly the concept I like though, with you being able to find these cool futuristic weapons, which you can only shoot randomly, with no enemies or targets. Surgeon Simulator is kind of similar to me, maybe because of the art style, and the fact it's all revolved around blood and body parts. But unlike a lot of people who find this game charming, I just find it really annoying and messy. I suppose there's a kind of charm in games that are inherently trying to downgrade their experience, with games like Cruelty Squad having these extremely outdated looking graphics, paired with intensely satisfying gameplay. But here, we don't really get either. The game's incredibly awkward to control, which I assume has to be by design, with you having to press several keys in the spacebar to control each finger. You control the hand with the mouse, with the buttons being used to lower and rotate the hand. It's pretty funny the first time you mess around in the game, but it leads to it having almost no replay value. Controlling the hand is frustrating no matter what, with picking up simple objects becoming a chore. That's the difference here. It's not a challenge, it's a chore. You could be doing everything right, pressing all the right buttons in the right order, but then the game will make a funny glitch, causing you to fail and start again. I do have to praise the content here though, with there being numerous types of surgeries to take on, all in different scenarios, like doing a heart transplant in a moving vehicle, or performing surgery on the Heavy from TF2. I can't deny it's got charm, but playing it for long periods of time, and hell, even short periods, can lead to some extreme frustration. Don't get me wrong, it could be specific to me, but games where you can actively see what you need to do, and only get held up because of the game's lack of control, just end up pissing me off. Let's finally take a look at two of my all-time favourite simulator games, one being fairly new, and the other being an old classic, and arguably the best and most fleshed out sim game I've played. Gas Station Simulator is a game which totally surprised me, as I thought it'd be similar to the quality of Junkyard Simulator. I once again only played the free version of this for this video, which was more than enough to buy the full game outright. It starts off with a slick intro cutscene, and of course the electric guitar. And when we get in the game, we can pick up a gun that we can't shoot, so it's off to a bad start. But picking up something else and throwing it, we discover we've got the power of Zeus, so it's won me back round already. We turn on the power, and then have to clean some things up for a bit. The graphics are pretty good. Not amazing, but they're alright. I like little details like how the music becomes diegetic when entering the gas station. The game also has a lot more personality than a lot of these other simulators, like giving us an arcade race game we can play, as well as letting us personalize our gas station, allowing us to buy different shelves and items from our computer. The actual customers are fucking hilarious. The polar opposite of the annoying glitches in Surgeon Simulator. You've got to fill up their car while they just stand and look at you. They get back in their car really weirdly, usually with some kind of body part sticking out. You can jump on them and drive away. You can throw shit at the people. It's just a lot of fun, and I'm telling you, this guy's not a fucking police officer. I don't know who or what he is, but this thing does not work for law enforcement. The short amount of time I spent with this game made me desperately want to go back for more in the full version, with aspects like lockpicking and painting being introduced towards the end of my play session. It's once again what I consider a much more polished experience compared to others, even with some of the jankiness. And finally, we have Euro Truck Simulator 2, what I consider to be the ultimate example of a simulator game. That's because it's simple, relaxing, but also very detailed, with a gameplay loop that will heavily appeal to some, but less to others. It's quite simply a delivery game, with you driving these trucks, all of which are real brands of car, which handle just as heavily as they look. These are arguably the most realistic driving mechanics I've personally experienced, although I've heard games like BeamNG also have this same level of realism. The trucks feel sluggish, but in the best way possible. You need to constantly consider your positioning, which becomes increasingly important as you unlock different types of cargo. Progression in this game is pretty slow in my opinion, but that's not really what you play this game for. As you deliver more cargo, you get more money and level up. Leveling up gives you access to things like higher value, flammable, and varying containers of cargo, which both increase the money you get, as well as increasing the risk if you damage them along the way. I apologize for the gameplay I've got here. The game seemingly knew this was my favorite kind of weather, but as you can see by all this footage, the graphics in this game are pretty damn incredible. This is because they keep you at a distance at all times. The trucks and cars all look pretty great up close, but looking at stuff from further away can sometimes reveal some shortcomings. But that doesn't really matter, as the general atmosphere from aspects like the weather enhance the game's environment immensely. As I said before, driving in this game is just downright relaxing. You don't always have to be accelerating like most games, as it not only realistically glides along the ground, but also because there's speed limits that you need to watch out for. You don't always need to follow these, and you won't be penalized unless you get caught by a speed camera, but you should always be wary. This is the case with a lot of things, leaning into the realism once again. You'll always be fined for things like going through a red light, driving down the wrong way, and crashing into other cars. But that's the thing, I don't think it really matters all that much. You get a fair amount of money to start off with, and earn quite a lot by doing these jobs. So after a short amount of time, and perhaps from the get-go, you can either choose to adhere to the highway code, or just drive exactly how you wish you could in real life. That is why I think it's the best simulator game. It's got a great atmosphere, chilled out gameplay that you can switch your mind off to, but also is just as intricate as all the other simulator games if you're interested. You can buy new trucks, and perhaps pick out specific models that you like in real life. You can immerse yourself into the game world by fine-tuning the experience with the numerous amounts of accessibility options. Case in point, you can even decide how complex your driving is. Do you want a simple automatic or stick shift? Just little things like that go such a long way in not turning off players, instead making them feel welcome and not overwhelmed by anything here. It's a game that can pretty much be played and enjoyed by anyone for a number of reasons, and that's why I consider it to be one of, if not the greatest simulator game we've gotten in recent memory. So, hopefully by the end of all that, we can now see what a simulator game is, what their appeal is, and what elements actually make up these games. Key traits are things like intense realism, with real brands either being directly injected or replicated within the game world. Mundanity being spun into game mechanics, like waiting patiently for fish to bite your bait, or screwing several pieces into a PC. An emphasis on relaxation, with these games typically lending themselves to be played with the sound off, in replace of music or a podcast, and a constantly evolving progression system, either in the form of unlocking items, gaining cash, or leveling up. In a weird way, these are kind of anti-games. They're things that shouldn't be fun, being turned into something fun. I don't know about you, but driving non-stop from Calais to Manchester doesn't sound like that much fun in reality, but is pretty therapeutic while doing it in a calm and relaxed environment, as well as having it not play out in real time. I feel like recently, the simulator game scene has sort of been evolving and getting more popular, with Power Wash Sim being played by several large YouTubers. So I hope in the coming future, especially with games like Gas Station Sim, we can look forward to some new and intriguing simulator experiences. Anyways, that's the video. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to subscribe with notifications on, so you know whenever I upload. Like the video, share to someone you know, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.